jobs will go away, roles will be automated. So Faisal, why the choice between automation and augmentation isn't an act of God. It's a boardroom decision. So let's get into it.
Job loss, job loss, job loss. What does that mean? Who's driving it? And the unfortunate thing is that it's the vendors who are driving it. If you really think about it.
Yeah, of course. Capitalism and it's pure. We are recording its countdown for 3, 2, 1. The lines between technology, business, and humanity are no longer just blurring, they are colliding. Welcome to Convergence, the series where we deconstruct the complex forces shaping our future. I'm Lauren from Zurich, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Faisal Hoque. Faisal, we've spent years talking about technology as a partner to human potential, but lately a strange narrative has taken hold of Silicon Valley. We're hearing the architects of the AI revolution, the CEOs of the world's most powerful labs describing a future of mass job displacement with a sense of tragic inevitability. They speak in the passive voice, jobs will go away, roles will be automated, as if they are meteorologists reporting on a storm that they didn't create. But today we're going to challenge that passive prognosis. We're looking at the Kidnapper's Ransom of AI, the idea that those creating the crisis are the same ones telling us how to survive it. Let's get into it. Faisal, how are you today?
Thanks. Yes, I'm doing well, thanks. It's an important topic. We wrote that piece on Fast Company. I mean, if you look at what's the motivation is it productivity gain? Is it enablement of human capability? Is it augmentation? Is it complete automation? And you have to kind of really dive into the financial incentive structure. So I think the vendors, meaning, the model generator and the infrastructure, AI infrastructure and software vendors, they're incented to drive this narrative that we need to automate, because it increases their growth and it increases their profit margin, right? And from a tax point of view, it's also interesting because even though you're replacing human workforce, you don't really tax the digital workforce same way as human resources, right? Even the companies who are using it are more incentivized to replace human workforce, even though it's a one-to-one replacement with workforce to workforce. The more AI we use, the more money those vendors make, whether that's OpenAI, whether that's Anthropic or whoever. But we're not really looking at the ramification, because if we are all unemployed and you create these whole vast enterprises, who's going to buy product and services? Because if you're unemployed, that means really nobody has any money to buy anything. But the counter argument these vendors are preaching, and a lot of policymakers and government leaders talks about, is that, well, we'll have universal base income and that will solve the problem. But if you're going to have all this in next 12, 18, 36 months, I don't know how you completely restructure the social structure that can absorb all these unemployed people and where the economy as a whole is going.
So you seem to have ran through all of the ideas in the article, which is fascinating because there's so much to unpack in this particular article. So for anyone that's new to Convergence, one of the sources of inspiration that we take for our conversations is a lot of the wonderful contribution that Faisal as a thought leader makes to the space. In this particular article that we are talking about today is an article that was published in Fast Company. So the article is "Stop Calling It Inevitable. The AI Job Crisis is Being Built, Not Born." And Faisal has touched upon a lot of facets that intertwine into that topic. A topic that is, as you said, at the forefront of a lot of conversations, or maybe not as much as we'd want them to be. What I'm curious about, Faisal, I'm going to put you on the spot here, is I know that you do a lot of research and also you put a lot of thought into the output that you share in these outlets. The subheading of, or the subtitle of the article is "The Men Burning Down the House Are Worried About the Smoke." Why is this not a female-led?
Oh, well, if you have to look at the top 7 software vendors, like OpenAI, Anthropic, Microsoft, all of those are run by male CEOs and leaders, right? The idea is that you set the house on fire, then the people who are setting the house on fire telling you that the house is on fire. So it's kind of that same mentality where you're saying, well, AI is going to take the job, but we're the one who's pushing for the replacement or automation or the uses of AI so that it completely automates every facet of everything that any human being does, whether it's a lawyer, doctor, a knowledge worker, whatever the case may be.
So do you think, though, I mean, these are obviously extremely intelligent individuals that are leading the next wave of technological evolution. And what's interesting, and I highlighted that into the introduction of our conversation, it's something that's picked upon in the article. The way that we talk about the automation, it's the use of the passive voice. For those that don't know, I'm a corpus linguist. I studied linguistics. It's part of my passion in life. And the passive voice is a way to alleviate any form of responsibility in a sentence because it detracts the subject as an element and detracts any form of subjectivity for the action that follows the subject. So in this, do you think that this is a narrative that's been crafted and passed on to convey? Or do you think that they really do feel that there's no subjective involvement in actually what is happening in the automation?
I think it's a little bit of both. And, you can look at a very sinister view where you can say, look, these people have godlike syndrome, and they may think that, well, we're going to push forward so that we are the one who is driving this future. And we're all mortal, so I'm not going to be alive in maybe 50, 60, 100 years. But in the meantime, I'm going to drive that advancement any way I can. And I mean, you can almost think about, look at Oppenheimer, atom bomb. You can look at those kind of technologies where creators of those technology put a break and all got together and put some sort of a barrier. Right? Is it defensible barrier? Who knows? We'll see. Meaning whenever we're talking about the nuclear warheads and atom bombs and that sort of a thing. But in the context of AI, it's not the case, right? Software is an industry that has never been regulated the way other type of industry has been regulated. Now, a lot of people talk about like regulating it like drug industry has done, but it's not the right analogy because it's not you can recall a AI model once it's distributed. It takes a lot more effort to recall that because it's not a physical thing. It's a digital thing. The best case scenario, it's self-serving to say, well, that's the way it is. And really, it's everybody's driving it, so we have to also drive it. To your point, it's like not taking the responsibility by using third-party language versus its responsibility and non-narrative.
Yeah, but I think it's a very sort of common, I wouldn't say natural, but it's a common leadership technique. You get a lot of leaders that do use the passive voice to frame certain elements. In this case, we're framing automation. And it's almost like the inevitable will happen. It's an inevitable pattern rather than a corporate strategy or a strategy that they have actively chosen to pursue. And I think that what you're touching upon in the element and the angle of regulation, there is a necessity for accountability. Like someone should hold them accountable. Like we have to, I would say, shift the framework from output-based metrics to intent-based governance, where leaders should be required in that sense to maybe sign or document impact statements for new AI deployments, where they do state, that the intent is substitution, replacing a human, or the intent is augmentation, where there is the opportunity to enhance a human. And I think with a framework like this, you have the clarity and also transparency of what your intent is, and a little bit of responsibility for the development and the inclusion if it is in the long term an automation exit. So I think it's a little bit of shifting this intent to make it a matter of record for boards, for regulators, so that we can transform, jobs that were lost into we chose to prioritize X instead of Y for the short term over long term.
It's a pivotal point for society in general to decide what we want humanity to be, right? Because And whose benefit is it? Is it the benefit of handful of people or, the global population, right? Human society cannot survive if the benefit is only for a handful of people. There's a wealth disparity that's happening, right? In the sense that only a handful of people are increasingly making more and more money because of this technology versus a lot of, think about this way, right? This recent narrative is all about white collar jobs, right? So white collar jobs actually has the most economic power to kind of hold together the society's progress, right? The white collar job is the one who buys the new homes, they buy the new car, they're the one who's doing dry cleaning, et cetera, right? So they're the one who's eating out more. So there's a ripple effect, economic ripple effect. So once you start moving that, and you're saying now all of a sudden that doctors, engineers, lawyers, thought leaders, the writers, they're all literally replaced by these quote unquote AI, and that's the way it's going to be, then what happens to the total economy? It collapses, right? Because where does those people get the income, right? This is why the intention, your point about intention, comes in play, because is the intention is technology as a whole, is it making me a better doctor? Is it making me a better lawyer? Is it making me a better entrepreneur? Is it making me a better writer or an artist? Or is it really replacing me, right? This is where we are. So if the intent is that we're going to keep pushing this so that it replaces, we're all going to be obsolete. So that goes to intention. Is this the intention that we should buy into? My argument is forget the moral conversation around it, right? Moral compass of it. Even if you look at it from an economic point of view, we have to put a break. Otherwise, economy as a whole is going to collapse. And you're just going to have a total meltdown globally.
So you're talking essentially about the consumer collapse. The example that is famously known is Henry Ford said to his workers that they needed to be able to buy his cars. Now, if white collar work is totally gone, who is left to buy the services these AI companies are producing? We have to, I suppose, in that equation as well, think about, are they the consumers of the AI that is being produced as well? I mean, that's another angle conversation that we could follow. True. But if we look at, if the middle class is automated out of existence, the very AI companies building these tools will find themselves in a sort of deemed desert, essentially. But then the logic is more like AI creates supply at near zero marginal cost. However, supply is useless without demand. So if white collar workers lose their purchasing power, the entire economy and the engine will stall. So what we're asking is that really these leaders, they also realize and they see that labor is also a demand, and that protecting jobs is not just social work, it's really market prevention. Are you convinced that they're not in that opinion and they don't see it?
Again, if you want to take a sinister view, you said, look, in the short term, if I can make as much money as I want, and then whatever happens in the future, you could see that gold rush is happening with buying as much as AI, whether you're getting the return or not going on, right? You can see in the short term, a lot of these, and I mean, by the way, let's not forget that a lot of this AI technology is complete hype. You've seen people are talking about how much productivity do you really gain? Like you and I kind of gone through this ourselves. One PowerPoint presentation that we could do it like an hour or two. We run it through an AI engine and it takes about 2 weeks to come back and finish it because it just doesn't do it right. So there's that element of it too. So there's an enormous amount of hype that how productive these things are. But regardless, if you just look at short term, this narrative and this intentional push towards that you have to do it, otherwise you too would be obsolete. But when they're saying you too would be obsolete, they're not talking to the mass, they're talking to the boardrooms. Because what the vendors are doing is they're saying, listen, Target and Walmart and whoever, right? You have to buy these AI, otherwise you're going to fall into a competitive disadvantage, right? So in the short term, you can see how that happens. And you saw the recent layoffs, right? And you can argue that many of those layoffs was labeled as AI related, but they may or may not be all related because there may be some other reason and they used AI to get rid of some of the people that they thought that there's an economic slowdown coming in. It's all market narrative, right? It's narrative what drives the market and valuation and et cetera, et cetera. So if you look at from that perspective, there's a lack of responsibility as a whole, hyping what it is and what it is not, but also driving the intention that we're going to be all jobless because that's what we're supposed to do. Because progression means that human race has reached a plateau, and the next race, which is a digital race, is going to have to take over to reach the next generation of advancement, which is completely false. That shouldn't be the case, right?
I can see that point. What I'm thinking about now is the words that you're conveying that make us ponder about the cost of falling behind, like the economical aspect of falling behind. And there's many tech leaders that do argue that if you do not keep up with the sort of projected or the narrative around automation and jobs will be automated, and that is the inevitable, then there's a lot of rivals that will actually act on your behalf. So it's almost like there's an invitation to have this element of competitive survival. It's sometimes used as a valid excuse. Oh, well, if my competitor is doing it and I don't do it, then I'm not competitive and I won't be able to survive as a business because of the lack of competitiveness. So if they're doing it, then I have to do it, and I have to make sure that I have these automation capabilities, and I have to make sure that I've got a suite of AI agents that will essentially allow me to implement these workflows and then eradicate certain steps or individuals within an organization. So you do have that valid excuse of, okay, well, I have to do what everyone else is doing. But to some extent, it's almost a false binary of if we don't, they will. Because instead of a race to the bottom on labor costs, you can also win a race on the priority of high trust by building systems that do prioritize human-machine collaboration. And this way we can create more resilience, creativity, and adaptable organization rather than those that are really built on the sort of rigid, top-down, authoritarian automation and lower costs. It's just a question of, again, do you choose to be part of that race, and what is the impact? Because there's always choice.
Look at the FOMO cells, right? The fear of missing out cells.
Yeah.
So you're not just doing it at an organizational level, you're also doing it on an individual level. Because you say, well, if you don't upskill, you're going to be jobless. So upskill. So what's happening, right? So a lot of this individual and organization are buying into the subscriptions that these companies are providing. So that is a direct financial benefit to these vendors, right? At the end of the day, there is no, in my mind anyway, there's no substitute for authentic product, services, personality, creativity, et cetera, et cetera. What makes everything unique is what individually you bring to the table, right? But the problem is that, global economic system, the reason it's called system, it is a system. It's an interconnected net effect. And that system needs governance. That system needs intention. That system needs moral compass. That system needs our individual responsibility, what we subscribe to, what we don't subscribe to, meaning that what we buy into, right? The purpose of that particular article, it was almost like a collective manifesto or a call to say, hey, wake up, because we're falling into a false narrative by a handful of vendors that has the most to gain and rest of us everything to lose, right? So that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah, so that ends on a positive note. We've actually got a stat. So it says for 4-to-1 augmentation potential. Despite the doom messaging, research from the Generative AI Skill Transformation Index of 2025 still shows that augmentation potential outweighs automation risk 100%. By 4-to-1. On average in occupation, it only has a 43% potential for augmentation compared to only an 11% risk of full replacement, providing that total replacement is a choice and not a technical necessity. So let's leave our listeners, our viewers with something positive and certainly inspirational that aligns with the Fast Company article to ponder.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it's a both individual and organizational choice how we want to shape the future.
Exactly. So thank you for this conversation today, Faisal, and I hope everyone else that's joined us in this journey and this conversation has enjoyed it. You can join us on many of the channels on YouTube, iHeartRadio, LinkedIn, across all major podcast
Apple,
channels.
Amazon,
Exactly. And we thank you for being part of this journey. Thank you.
Thank you.